But the differentiator for me between what would be, hey, I'm stressed and overwhelmed because of the amount of work that is going on, right? When you talk about supply chain and the back orders and companies are closing down entire service lines, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, this is our go-to for this whole, product line. And now we're playing with the rest of the country, trying to find alternatives and all that kind of stuff. So I think the differentiator there is if you're feeling like you are at kind of like that simmer or that slow boil all the time, and that it might not take a really big thing to push you over the edge, right? It might just be what objectively looks like a small thing.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we have Gwen Janssen, author of ADHD, How to Go from Powerless Professional to Powerhouse Leader. She's joining us for, really an educational episode on neurodiversity and also specifically her experiences with ADHD, which led her to write this book. And Hayes, there may be many people out there that go undiagnosed who might recognize some of the signs and symptoms. She's going to share some resources and give us some tips and best practices for really being that powerhouse leader, as she's described in her book.
She is a powerhouse. Holy cow. I wish you could hear all the things that she's involved in. Hang around, because I think you're really going to enjoy this. You're going to learn a ton about, working with it, dealing with it if you already have ADHD, or working with someone that might. So stick around and enjoy. I think you're going to have a great time.
All right. We're going to be right back with Gwen. Stay with us.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
We are speaking with Gwen Janssen. She is the author of ADHD, How to Go from Powerless Professional to Powerhouse Leader. And Gwen, what's so great is not only are you an author and somebody who has dealt with adversity in the workplace, specifically obviously around ADHD, but you have experience in supply chain. So we're going to be connecting all of these different dots, and you also have a nursing background, so we're going to throw that provider clinician side. You're pretty much a conversation for anybody that's listening to this podcast, and so I'm excited to dive into it today. And welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me, and I'm very excited to talk about all of these things. And it really would take an ADHDer to be able to tie all of that together cohesively, right? But we're going to do it today.
Gwen, you have found your tribe right here. I think everybody in here is all
day
about
long.
this. So
all day long.
There's so much you can teach us. So I'm excited you're here. Thanks for joining us.
No, absolutely.
Gwen, why don't you tell us about that background I was just describing? And we'll lead into even starting to write a book and the inspiration and the methodology that goes into it. But before we do that, tell us about, being a nurse, becoming a nurse, and then also how you found yourself working in healthcare supply chain as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was one of the lucky ones that always knew I wanted to be a nurse. This definitely, now that I'm older and kind of know how my brain works, ties into my ADHD, but I never felt like I was really talented at one thing, right? Except for taking care of other people, which I'm sure there's a whole lot of therapy to unpack in that one as well. But because of that, like it really led me naturally into nursing. And I really had a lot of drive to pursue that degree. And so really I went right out of high school, got my bachelor's in nursing, and always really wanted to do labor and delivery. Initially, I thought I wanted to be a midwife, actually. So I was lucky that I got a labor and delivery job pretty much right out of school, did bedside nursing for a couple of years, and then started to get this itch of like, okay, what am I going to do next, right? Because that's the way that, it goes with neurodiversity. You're always looking for the next thing. So did travel nursing for a couple of years, and that was phenomenal, kind of going all over the country and seeing different practices, different standards. You would think in the US that we're pretty standardized, and we're really not. And leadership really fell into my lap, right? I had gone in for an interview for a bedside nursing role. And after sitting with the site administrator, she was like, hey, like we have an open manager position. Have you ever thought about leadership? And I almost laughed in her face, right? I'm like, no, like I am not that PC person. I'm not the one that's going to be, that stuffed shirt type of traditional leader. But I figured I would give it a try because I was like, I never had a leader I respected. So maybe I can do it a little bit better. Right. Not to sound arrogant, but like maybe I can change the game a little bit. So I've been in leadership for about 6+ years now. I have a couple of degrees under my belt, specifically related to nursing leadership, working on my doctorate right now. I have to say, I ended up falling into supply chain as well. But I'll pause there because I know that the supply chain gig is kind of a different arm of this. So, was there anything that you had questions about kind of the nursing or the leadership background before I dive into clinical value analysis and all the shiny and exciting with that?
I think one of my thoughts maybe is more of a transitional question, but I remember when I got my nursing degree, like that job, especially when you're doing floor nursing, you're on your feet all day, you're moving around. And I definitely found that when I moved into, roles that had me in front of a computer, less on my feet, less lifting, less walking during my entire shift, more independent scheduling and management, sort of my tasks and responsibilities, which I'm assuming is something that you ran into when you moved into supply chain. It was less running around the unit and taking care of patients and doing all of that, and a little bit more of that, seated work. I had a real hard time transitioning with that. And I wonder, did that change or adjustment to being a little bit more of a desk job? And I suppose that would go regardless of supply chain, like even becoming, in a leadership position. It's like you got to do more reports and things like that. Did you find that was difficult from going to a more active kind of job role versus something that was a little less physically active?
I definitely think so, because neurodiversity will often show up really differently in men and in women, right? And, equally so in boys and in girls. So it's less common for women and girls to have as significant physical hyperactivity presentations with things like ADHD, but there is so much cognitive hyperactivity, right? So even if I can be sitting here, like my brain is going 1 trillion miles a minute, but the physical movement helps kind of focus some of that cognitive hyperactivity. And so you're absolutely right. I struggled significantly to the point where like even now, like the people that share the office outside, they'll tell you like, I'm always like, like I can't be sitting in my office for very long, right? Like I'm up and I'm out on the unit, right? And I'm going and I'm rounding and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. They're like, why don't you just pick up the phone and call that person? I'm like, nope, I'm just going to go talk to her, like, and everything. So it is definitely a challenge, right? And it's something that, with that adjustment, I had to find ways that now I could continue to be successful and stay focused in the work that I was doing without that outlet of being able to like up and move and run all day long. And especially in labor and delivery, right? You're helping women push out babies or you're running to the OR and you're doing all this stuff. So it is a very active and fast-paced environment. So it was an adjustment for sure. So I can relate to what you're saying.
One of the things I struggled with during the pandemic was all of a sudden video cameras on and Zoom instead of conference calls. And I used to get on conference calls and pace around the house because, I'm working from home. And so I would stay physically active that way. And then all of a sudden it's cameras on and I couldn't be on the go anymore. And I noticed a transition there too. So, you got diagnosed with neurodiversity, or ADHD, I think while you were working in supply chain, correct? Was there something
Right
about
after I had finished in supply chain?
right after you finished? Was there
Yeah.
something that was happening in your role in supply chain and that's really where I'm kind of going with all of these questions. Was there something about that change in role that really like maybe bubbled this up to the surface that you thought, oh, maybe I should check and see if I have ADHD, or how did that all come about?
Well, it's funny because it worked really well transitioning into the clinical value analysis role for me for a multitude of reasons, right? So, I was burnt out to a crisp in my last nursing leadership role before I moved into clinical value analysis. I had worked for a terribly toxic boss. I'm not even going to call her a leader because she wasn't that. And it was a really nasty environment. And I got to the level of burnout where like you wake up and you don't even like who you are as a person anymore. And so, moving into supply chain, not only was the work really different, it was completely new because I had spent my whole career in maternity, and realistically, you don't spend a lot of time on maternity stuff in supply chain because there's not a lot of new things that come out and about. But also, I think the really influential factor there was that I had the greatest leader I have ever worked for. And to this day, we are still, she's one of my best friends. And so when we talk about like what that meant for me in the clinical value analysis role, she allowed me the flexibility to work when I wanted to work, right? She was like, honestly, I'm not a micromanager. You do whatever you need to do to get your work done. And as long as it gets done, like, I don't care how or when you do it. Right. And that was such a beautiful thing for my brain because, and you can probably relate to this, that, there are days when you can literally get an entire week's worth of work done in an 8-hour period. Right. And then there are other days where you struggle to get 5 minutes worth of, cohesive work done in an 8-hour day. And that's just the way that our brains work. When it decides that it's just not going to play in the sandbox today, there's nothing you can do about that. And so I really loved the ability that not only my leader gave me, but also the nature of the work. Now that I wasn't in direct patient care anymore, the type of work that I was doing really allowed for this change in the way that I performed the role. That was such an incredible eye-opener for me about like, wow, I really love working like this, right? Like this is how I can be successful and get so much done without feeling burnt out.
All right. Let me jump in here, Gwen, because if my wife was here, she would definitely say that, I suffer from ADD, no doubt, right? She's a master's trained special education teacher. So she knows what when she sees it. Now, with that being said, you waited till later in life to truly be diagnosed, but did you always know? And once you were diagnosed, what did that free you up? Did it make you think differently, different environments? Tell me about that.
Yeah, no, that's a really excellent question, and one that a lot of people think about, right? So realistically, the catalyst for me to seek out diagnosis was actually my nephew being diagnosed, because he is the very, stereotypical, like, physical hyperactivity presentation, right? Like, that boy is just, oh my goodness, he's like the Energizer bunny. He's just go, 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 go. And he talks a million miles a minute, and he's, constantly interrupting people and all of that kind of stuff. And so he was diagnosed, and his pediatrician had told my sister, hey, just as an FYI, like ADHD is genetic, right? So, do with that what you will, right? And, at first, to be honest, and I think it's important to be really transparent about the fact that when my nephew was first diagnosed with ADHD, he was extremely young. I think maybe 3 years old, or maybe not even quite 3 yet. And I was so resistant to the diagnosis. I told my sister, I'm like, that's crap. Like, he is just a little boy. Let him be a little boy, right? Like, why do we have to say that there's this, this clinical thing going on with him? They're just trying to push meds. Like, don't listen to them, whatever. And I had this really negative initial reaction. But then as he got a little bit older and these problems kind of became more profound, and it was really clear that he was struggling, right? This wasn't just like, hey, he wants to bounce off the walls and play around. Like, he was having a hard time processing and interacting with his environment in a productive way, right? And so once I finally checked myself and was like, maybe this is what's going on. I sat down and I did the nerdy nurse thing, and I just dove into as much research as I could find, right? Like peer reviewed articles, like all of these, studies and things like that. And it was like looking into a mirror, right? Because, you learn that there are all these different presentations of ADHD. It's not just that like bouncing off the walls. And I said to my sister, I'm like, after I'd gotten out of this, like, giant wave of hyper focus, like trying to find all this information in such a short amount of time, I was like, I'm pretty sure we have ADHD. And she was like, what? And I share all this stuff with her, and she was like, oh my God. So then, we kind of sought diagnosis as a result of my nephew being diagnosed. But I have to say, Hayes, like it made so much sense. And it was freeing because there was finally a way to put a name to every single struggle that I had had up to that point in my life that had been misdiagnosed as anxiety or depression. Or at one point, they even thought like, hey, maybe you have borderline personality disorder, right? Like they're throwing all these things out. And when they told me that, I was 19 years old and I was scared, right? And all this time it's just ADHD and no one knew it because it presents differently in women, right?
So Gwen, I'm just thinking about, I love your background, how you labor and delivery, nurse, on the fly, go, relax, go. Justin had some comments in there. Then you get into the supply chain. Then you're visiting with different people all the time. I remember being a dry erase board freak. Notes, lists, tasks, quadrants, Stephen Covey's R1, R2, R3, R4, call it whatever you want. What were some coping mechanisms that you used to make sure, because I felt like I could take a truck and run over people moving way too fast. Slow it down. I think, Hayes, you get it. Sometimes I run right over you. You can't keep up.
You're not like
Hayes, for God's sake, let's go.
I don't know though. Is that a Hayes problem or is that a Gary problem? I don't know.
Well, I protruded on Hayes
I think that
as much as I
demonstrated better than anybody else could say of what ADHD exactly is in that rant you just gave us.
Oh boy!
Everybody's listening.
Oh boy!
Yeah, people listening to this are going, "Oh my gosh, Gary needs to be diagnosed today."
Right? They're like, oh my God, you maybe don't want to get this group of people together again, right? Like, good Lord.
Oh, we get a lot done. It just moved really fast and be all over the board, and we'd hear sounds and have to come back to it. But anyways, just for the people listening, like, what are some of the tricks of the trade that you could share that you utilize to make sure that you were staying at a decent pace, a decent rhythm, and not getting distracted or too hyperactive and too focused?
Yeah, no, and that's another really excellent question, right? It's because a lot of people think that having ADHD, means that like you don't get good grades or whatever, right? Like I, had excellent grades in high school. I was Dean's List. I got into my top choice college, early decision, did really well. I had 4.0 GPAs in both of my master's programs, one of which was like a top 10 program in the country, right? And, but you're absolutely right, Gary, that it's all about setting yourself up for success with support systems. And, to be honest, and maybe you guys had the same experience, right? Holy, I am the worst procrastinator you will ever meet, right? Like I have to have that last minute, have to get it done. Otherwise, it's just not going to get done, right? I can sit there and be telling myself, Gwen, you got to get started on this because it's due soon, or Gwen, you got to work on this. And until it's due, like at the very, see, look, I see. Yes. Yep. So that's a good point, right? So you show a printout of your calendar. So I have and I know this can go both ways as far as like good work-life balance and stuff. I have my work email uploaded onto my phone because it has my calendar on it, right? And I live and die by my calendar. So I have my work calendar on my phone. I have my personal calendar on my phone. I take a ton of notes in the Notes app on my cell phone if I'm somewhere that I can't write things down. When I'm here at work, I actually have a pocket size, like one of those little nerdy notebooks that I keep in because normally I wear scrubs, that I keep in my little, my little pocket. And I won't show you my desk because some of the stuff that's written on there I don't want to put on camera, but I have approximately 1 trillion post-it notes that I like, keep track of everything so that it's just to-do lists everywhere, right? It's auto renewing like different orders that you need, right? Like, like setting it up so that your dog food comes, every month, right? Like auto renewing your, your insurance and your subscription for this and your prescriptions and all of that stuff. So that, because good Lord, if you have to keep track of that, like it's not happening. You're running out of everything.
Yeah. It's interesting, really resonating with what you're saying. And so I want to ask a qualifying question about that too, but like, I don't do post-it notes, but I send myself an email because I'm afraid I'm going to forget. And so and I'm obsessive about my calendar and managing my life, personal and professional, on the calendar and keeping my inbox clean. I know a lot of people let the inbox go to like 1,000 emails and they're fine with that. And I cannot do that. I've got to have it under 10 emails, or I've got to file it somewhere and set a follow-up. And one of the things I always did with Outlook was set follow-up because it cleared my mind. The problem was if that all went unresolved or I couldn't trust a process, then my brain was cluttered. And I remember feeling like,
yes.
So I wanted to ask you though, part of the problem is I also take on a lot of different roles. I'm involved in multiple entrepreneurial projects. I definitely was traditionally a yes man. I'm working on that. And so I would find myself taking on more responsibility than I really should. And I think there are plenty of people that are not neurodiverse that do those things, right? And so this would be my kind of clarifying question for you is like, especially for people on the front lines and supply chain, like the task overload and information overload and the management, even of just like things like back orders, is so large right now. What's the difference between somebody who's feeling overwhelmed because of workload and how they cope with that versus somebody who might be neurodivergent, maybe has ADHD and is struggling maybe with organization, or maybe I'm missing, a little bit of that there. But how would you, like, let's say you're listening and, I think all three of us, Hayes and Gary and myself, are like self-diagnosing right now and always sort of question. So I know that there are people out there that are sort of self-diagnosing from this conversation, but how would they know the difference maybe as like a heat check?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest points of clarity for me that, it was like an aha moment is that, and I write about this in my book because I think it's a really easy way to put words to the feeling that when you are neurodiverse, right? Because for me, I actually have ADHD and autism. So I know all the grammar people are like, you can't say neurodiverse if you're one person, but I have 2 types of neurodiversity, right? So with neurodiversity, we spend so much of our time what we call masking, which means that I spend, every second of every day trying to figure out how to communicate with people that are not neurodivergent, right? How to appear and present and behave in a way that is socially acceptable and professional, right? Because to your point, Justin, like you didn't feel like you could get up and walk around during the meetings that you were having, even though that was the best way to help keep you focused, right? So things like that, where you have to adjust the way that you behave and you communicate, and you have to think about every single thing that comes out of your mouth or that you do. So you're at almost like a simmer all the time, right? Like you are at like a simmer all the time. And sometimes what feels like, or what can look like a small thing to neurotypical people, or maybe even other neurodivergent people, can be the extra tiny bit of heat that it takes to throw you into an uncontrolled boil, right? Because you are already up to here at your baseline. So it doesn't take very much to feel overwhelmed. And what you describe about taking on so much and being, like a people pleaser in recovery, right? Like a yes man and everything like that, which I can completely identify with that. So in addition to working full time as a nursing director right now, I also am an adjunct professor. I teach 2 nursing college courses. I just wrote my book and I'm working on promoting that. I founded what's called the END Institute for Excellence in neurodiversity, and I'm trying to get my doctorate all at the same time. And, like that is just way too much. Like I need to admit, like it is way too much. I have committed to way too many things. And, so
and yet
it's
you
very
love it.
common for us to do
fuels
that.
you, right?
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is you can't stop doing that. Like as much as you say like, hey, I need the rest, like as soon as you start taking things off your plate, you have all this guilt and this shame and you're like, oh my goodness, like I'm a failure. I'm not good enough. I'm not trying hard enough. Or you just get bored, right? Because then there's no more dopamine, right? So realistically, when you talk about these things, I think potentially for people, and everyone will identify it a little bit differently for themselves, but the differentiator for me between what would be, hey, I'm stressed and overwhelmed because of the amount of work that is going on, right? When you talk about supply chain and the back orders and companies are closing down entire service lines. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, this is our go-to for this whole, product line. And now we're playing with the rest of the country trying to find alternatives and all that kind of stuff. So I think the differentiator there is if you're feeling like you are at kind of like that simmer or that slow boil all the time, and that it might not take a really big thing to push you over the edge, right? It might just be what objectively looks like a small thing.
So why do you feel like supply chain could be a really great career for somebody who's neurodiverse? Like, why is that a good match? Because you and I, it's really what led to this interview, was kind of talking about that. Where do you see the synergies there?
I love Gary's face right now. Can we just take a moment to appreciate what's going on?
I couldn't look at his face another minute.
I can't wait to hear this. Gwen. Please.
So for me, I think I would be remiss if I didn't give, again, another shout out to the leader that I had at the time. But I will say that, one of the challenges and the reason why, people with ADHD kind of present in the world the way that we do is because at baseline, we have a much lower level of dopamine than a neurotypical person. And so you are always seeking out the new, the exciting, the novel, anything that will get those brain chemicals churning, because we don't have the same level. So we love these things that are kind of going to give us those surges, because we don't have the luxury of like having a good, like baseline all the time, like neurotypical people do. And so I really loved working in supply chain because for me, it was a challenge, right? Like I talked about, when I did clinical value analysis, you guys know, like a lot of that work is really focused on your procedural areas, right? So your cath lab, your IR, your OR, all of those things that I had never been a bedside nurse in those areas, right? So all of a sudden it's like, hey, ready, go, like learn about all of this stuff, like manage these surgeons and these doctors that are coming to you and they want this, and this, all this brand new and shiny. And, oh, by the way, because when I started in supply chain, I started in October of 2019. And then less than 4 months later, all of a sudden we were in a global pandemic, right? And so, then on top of like learning this role and trying to learn these different facets of nursing and of medicine, then all of a sudden it's like, bam, COVID, right? And everything is on allocation. Your PPE is, is constantly teetering on the edge of like, are we going to be able to keep our people safe? So there was so much, I don't want to use the word excitement as the traditional sense, right? But it was so much novelty and it was such a high sense of urgency, right? It was really important work. It was really things that needed to get done immediately or there would be serious repercussions. And then because I'm a nerd, like I really loved crunching all of those numbers in Excel, right? And so like I think I worked on a project that one time was like 3,000 line items, right? And my boss was like, wait, I can't believe you got that done so fast. And I was like, I just got in the zone, right? Like I got into my hyper focus and just and knocked it all out. And it also really helped me improve my communication skills even further, because that is something that people with neurodiversity can sometimes struggle with when trying to communicate effectively with neurotypical people. And we all know surgeons are not always the easiest to get along with, right? And so that really helped me now all of a sudden I'm working with doctors from different specialties. I'm working with supply chain team members that I really had no interactions with prior to this. So it helped me personally develop a lot of skills. Professionally, it was really exciting, and there was always something new that could really help keep me engaged in the work, when previously I may have been like, oh, like this is, I'm bored. Like, let's move on to the next thing, right?
So Gwen, I want to add on to that. It's almost the chaos creates opportunity for the neurodiversity individual. It's like we love to be in that zone. The typical 9 to 5 card swiper coming in, that is I curl up in a ball. I'm done. Like I want to jump into a new doctor coming in, new CRM. I saw your eyes light up when you started talking about all these different things going up and your increased speech. You're ready to go. You're firing. And then you slow it down. You kind of visit about it, but just thriving in supply chain. You're never like at the top of the list. You're fixing problems all the time. That is a successful supply chain organization. Yes, you have great SOPs, great SOWs. Yes, you're trying to do things, but when there's a hurricane, when there's a ice storm, when there are things going on and you can't get product for mission, patients, and doctors, I mean, that's your nurse side. Like you're passionate, you're emotional, but we just kind of thrive in that chaos. I see that. You feel that like you want to fix all the time, right, Gwen?
Yes. And it's incredible what we can get done, right? Like, it's funny because it's like, like you said, like we die in the boredom, right? Like a lot of people are rejuvenated when they don't have anything to do. And my goodness, like that just sucks all of the energy out of me when I don't have anything to do. And so, we thrive in chaos. That is really like our most fertile ground, right? We are amazing problem solvers, very creative thinkers, like outside of the box, which makes us great in a crisis.
All right, Gwen, great interview. And, I guess as kind of a final question, it's 2 parts, but I'm wondering what insight or advice that you could share to people out there. We were sort of talking about self-diagnosing ourselves earlier, but there are people listening who are neurodivergent and, maybe they're even not sure how to fit into that workplace. You talked about masks, right? So what advice would you give them? And then also, what advice might you give their coworkers as well?
That's a really great 2-part question, actually. So starting with the people that, are either diagnosed already as neurodivergent, whether, gone through the traditional clinical pathway of diagnosis or they've, self-diagnosed, or people that are like listening to this and they're like kind of having moments like we had, right? Where they're like, oh my goodness, like that's me, right? Like that's everything that I do. One of the best things that I can say is please use reputable resources when you are looking for information about neurodiversity. So like chad.org, Chad is like a, really reputable organization in the United States. So chad.org is a really great, add.org is a really great one, and you want to make sure that you are learning appropriate things about the way that your brain works. And I think that's the best gift that you can give yourself, right? Because it helps to release the shame and the burden of all of these things that you've carried around for your whole life, right? So instead of like the, internal narrative of like, oh, I'm lazy, or like, oh, I don't have enough ambition because I'm a procrastinator, right? It's, hey, that's just how my brain works. Sometimes it's on hyperdrive and sometimes I can't get it to do anything at all. And that's just how it is. So I'm going to take advantage of the times when it's on hyperdrive, right? And you want to lean into these strengths. And that's the best piece of advice that I can give people, is to say that there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. You have a beautiful brain. You are capable of so much, right? Think about what Justin said, all of these entrepreneurial things that you guys are all involved in, right? And you heard my story as well, right? We have so much drive. And again, that creativity to always want to strive and do these amazing things. And so, let go of the shame. Lean into the things that you're great at and work on building support systems for the things that you might have, might find to be challenging for you, which is, like, again, whether it's Post-it notes, whether it's the calendar app, whatever it is that you use, auto, reordering and things like that. There's no shame in it. Do what makes you successful, right? Because everyone else gets to do that and not feel ashamed about it. So why should we have to feel bad about just setting ourselves up for success? Because there's so much much potential in the way that your brain is wired. You just need to be able to learn how to unlock it.
So there's hope for me, Gwen. Is that right?
I mean, Hayes, I don't know that I'd go that far, my friends. You
I
might
think
be a
you're
lost
spot
cause,
on,
but
right?
I don't know. Maybe we'll have to get your wife's input on that, right? We'll have to have her lay down.
Y'all are gonna be best buds. I can tell after this.
I was just gonna say, not for nothing. I feel like I'm gonna be best friends with your wife, Hayes. Like,
oh my Lord, it's been helpful.
She's getting a copy of the book too. Then when we talk about how other people can be supportive of us in the workplace, I think being open-minded is really important, right? Because so much of the challenges that occur for neurodiverse adults and especially professionals and leaders, like I have overcome significant challenges and every step was a fight, right? And no one deserves to struggle like that. And so realistically, it's just about recognizing that just because someone else does something differently than you do does not make it wrong, right? And does not make it less effective. And so to your point, Justin, like honestly, like what I always tell people, like when I'm training, or working with organizations or leaders to say, hey, if you have neurodiverse team members, this is how you can support them. Or for organizations, if you're wanting to expand your DEI to include neurodiverse people and supporting them in the workplace, these are some things you can consider, like allowing your people to get up and move around during meetings, right? Asking us to sit down for an extended period of time is painful. And it also will not be effective because maybe I'm sitting still, but my goodness, my brain is 10,000 miles away. So you're not getting my best right now anyway. My sister bought me this awesome like fidget toy that's just like magnetic, and so I just sit here and I play with these while I'm on meetings, or I even take them to meetings with me sometimes, right? Yes, exactly. See, Aaron's got one too. There's all different types, right? Whether it's like a fidget cube like that, whether it's something like this, like some people like silly putty. A lot of people that I know, they doodle, right? Like that's how they stay focused, is these traditional ways of seeming like we are not engaged or we're not paying attention are actually what helps us stay engaged and pay attention. And so that open-minded approach to say, like, Justin, if you need to get up and walk around, please do that, right? Like I start all of my talks with that. I'm like, if anyone needs to stand up and move around the room while I'm speaking, I encourage you to do so, right? And just creating a safe space for people to talk about their neurodiversity. Because in my workplace, like I'm very open about it, right? Like I made a commitment to myself that I am going to stop hiding who I am, because that is keeping the best of me from the world, right? When I'm trying to be everybody else because I think that's what everybody else wants, it is just exhausting and I'm not my best, right? And so I made a commitment that I'm like, I'm just going to show up how I am and I will find where I fit. And, so I talk very openly about having ADHD and being autistic at work. And, the crazy thing is multiple people at very high and, mid-level leadership and, even staff members that work for me, right? So many people are like, oh my God, you have ADHD. Like I have ADHD too. Can I ask you some questions? Or like people are like, hey, like I saw your TikTok about this. Like, my son was just diagnosed. Like, do you have some advice or can I ask you? And it starts this amazing dialogue. So creating a safe space for your peers to be themselves can make such a huge difference. And it's only going to serve the organization's mission and betterment of the team, because then you're getting that person's best, which is truly an exceptional thing.
Gwen, great job with this interview. Can't wait to read the book. I know we mentioned that you were the author, but the book is just coming out. Is that correct?
Yes. So it actually was just available for order on Amazon for the first time at the end of last week.
Excellent.
Congrats.
All right. So by the time this episode goes out, everybody, head over to Amazon and search ADHD, how to go from powerless professional to powerhouse leader. Gwen, great job. I don't know how you fit it all into your life, but this definitely created some cause for self-reflection, and I'm sure it will for others listening too. And just want to thank you for being yourself and bringing that to the table in the interview today, and for all the work that you've been putting in. Everybody out there should definitely find you on LinkedIn, connect with you, follow, and then also, as you said, this amazing dialogue. Reach out to Gwen if you have questions or you want to be pointed to those credible resources like we talked about on this episode. Gwen, thanks so much for coming on.
No, thank you guys. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate it. And if you ever need me back, I'm more than happy to rip with y'all again.
Excellent. Gwen Janssen, author of ADHD, How to Go from Powerless Professional to Powerhouse Leader. And Hayes, very interesting personal story. I think one thing that really stuck out to me was just how many different projects she's involved in. And she was describing this experience around, keeping the dopamine coming and, kind of the psychology or the biology really, behind what fuels that ADHD. We all know people, serial entrepreneurs and the like, that get their hands into everything. And, I'm one of those people. I'm sure to some extent, Hayes, you are as well. And, I don't know that necessarily means that you're neurodivergent, but I definitely can grapple with that dopamine response. And, I love to feel productive. And I can see where that's a huge asset to people on the team and supply chain, especially nowadays. Like that desire to be productive and have accomplishment, especially with, how much is going on and how quickly we have to be adjusting to this new healthcare environment that we're all working in. I can see that being a huge benefit to organizations.
Oh, 100%. And I think having that type of mindset and or biology and it's what's made her successful. And frankly, it makes a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people successful. They're always chasing that next thing. Matter of fact, it can be considered a negative, but frankly, in my view of the world, I think it's a great thing. You got to learn how to calm it down, in which she gave some really good ideas about that. So I really enjoyed it. It helped me on my own self-awareness, and I think probably others out there. So,
all right, well, that's going to do it for this show. But as a reminder, everybody subscribe to Power Supply on LinkedIn as well as Facebook if you're there, and you'll get all the content. We want you to download the smartphone app. And Hayes, as you've always said, that gentleman's agreement. If you really enjoyed an episode, it made a big difference, or it stood out to you, please share that out to your connections. You can also forward our e-newsletter by email. And speaking of the e-newsletter, if you're not already subscribing, go to powersupplymedia.net. There's a form right on our homepage that you can fill out, and we will get you all of the announcements and resources that go out every week in our e-newsletter. And a big shout out to Brian Bartel for all of his efforts in getting that newsletter together and sent out every single week. And finally, on behalf of Hayes, Gary, and myself, thanks for listening to this week's episode of
Power Supply.